The late afternoon sun painted soft reflections on Lake Norman, scattering gold and silver ripples across the water. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans and blooming magnolias drifting from the patio garden. Inside the cafe, Caroline Whitmore sat across from her friend Vanessa Cole, stirring her cappuccino with a deliberate calm that didn't quite match the tension in Vanessa's voice. "Caroline," Vanessa said, leaning forward, manicured nails tapping the glass table. "Tell me you're joking. Michael Hayes? The delivery guy?" Her tone lingered between disbelief and mockery. Caroline smiled faintly. "He's not just a delivery guy, Vanessa. He's kind, he works hard, and he actually listens when I talk." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Sweetheart, kindness doesn't pay bills. You're the daughter of Whitmore Automotive. You have investors, partners, people who expect you to marry someone who at least owns a car that isn't older than us." She paused, taking a sip of her latte. "You can't build a life on decency." Caroline looked out toward the lake, where the reflection of sunlight rippled like a quiet heartbeat. "Maybe not, but I also can't build it on status." Her tone was even, but her hands trembled slightly under the table. "My parents built everything they had from nothing. I just want something that feels real." "Real?" Vanessa laughed softly. "This isn't one of your father's charity projects, Caroline. You're 27, not 17. Love doesn't conquer class anymore. It never did." The words hit sharper than Vanessa meant them to. For a long moment, Caroline said nothing. The hum of conversation around them filled the space, couples laughing, phones buzzing, the sound of ice clinking in glasses. Outside, a boat engine started in the distance, its echo rolling softly over the water. Finally, Caroline turned back to her friend. "You know what my father told me before he died. He said, you can lose money, houses, even your name. But if you lose your heart, there's nothing left worth fighting for." Vanessa sighed, checking her phone, clearly uninterested in philosophy. "Fine. Have your romance. Just don't expect me to attend your wedding if it's in a garage." Caroline smiled again, this time without resentment. "That's fair. I'll save you a seat anyway." Vanessa stood, adjusted her blazer, and walked toward the exit with her usual confidence, her heels clicking like punctuation marks of judgment. When she was gone, the silence settled differently, gentler but heavier. Caroline turned back toward the window. The lake shimmered beneath the fading light, calm and endless. She could almost see her parents sitting there again, her mother laughing softly, her father's arm resting behind her chair. The image dissolved into reflection. For the first time in weeks, Caroline let herself exhale fully. The world around her was still loud with opinions, but inside her chest, something quiet and unshakable began to take root. A certainty that love, no matter how fragile, was still worth defending. Years before the afternoon at the cafe, Caroline Whitmore's life had been defined by the hum of engines and the smell of gasoline. Her parents, Thomas and Eleanor Whitmore, had started their first gas station on the outskirts of Charlotte long before anyone believed they could succeed. It was nothing but a small wooden shack with 2 pumps and a hand-painted sign. Her father worked 14-hour days repairing cars, and her mother ran the register while teaching Caroline multiplication by counting customers' change. Over the years, that single station turned into a small empire, Whitmore Automotive Group. By the time Caroline entered high school, her parents owned 12 stations and 3 repair garages across the Carolinas. They were known not only for fair prices, but for treating mechanics like family. At Christmas, her mother would bake pies for every employee's family. Caroline grew up believing that kindness was just as valuable as money, maybe even more. But good hearts didn't shield them from life's cruelty. When Caroline was 22, her mother suffered a heart attack during a summer storm. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. The house on Hawthorne Lane once filled with laughter, turned quiet overnight. Her father tried to stay strong, working longer hours to avoid facing the emptiness at home. Caroline often found him sitting in the garage after midnight, staring at her mother's photograph. A year later, the doctors said the words she still couldn't forget: stage 4. Thomas Whitmore had lung cancer, and there was nothing more they could do. The man who had once lifted engines with his bare hands now struggled to lift a cup of tea. Caroline took over operations at the company almost overnight, managing payroll, repairs, and vendor contracts. She made mistakes, stumbled, but refused to give up because he was watching. One evening, as the winter rain fell against the windows, her father called her into his hospital room. The faint beeping of monitors echoed like a metronome of finality. "You've done well, kiddo," he whispered, his voice thin but steady. "You'll have money, property, people who'll tell you what to do with both. Don't let them decide who you are. Be good, be strong. And remember, honor doesn't come from your name, it comes from how you treat people." She held his hand until the warmth left it. The funeral drew crowds from every corner of the city, employees, old customers, even competitors. People spoke of Thomas and Eleanor as if they were legends. But for Caroline, legends didn't fill the silence at night. When the guests left, she stood alone by their graves, her breath visible in the cold air. The world called her the heir to a fortune, but all she felt was the echo of two voices she would never hear again, and the heavy weight of being the last Whitmore left to carry their name. The office of Whitmore Automotive Group still carried faint traces of her father's presence. The smell of motor oil, the distant whir of machinery, and the old framed photographs of him shaking hands with customers. Caroline had kept the place almost unchanged since his passing, believing that as long as the walls looked the same, the memories wouldn't fade. It was nearly noon when the receptionist knocked on her door. "Lunch delivery for you, Miss Whitmore." Caroline looked up from a spreadsheet filled with repair invoices. "I didn't order lunch." The man standing behind the receptionist smiled, holding a paper bag and 2 drinks in a cardboard tray. "Actually, it's from your assistant. She said you haven't eaten since morning." He looked out of place in the glass-walled office. Dark delivery uniform, slightly wrinkled. A baseball cap pushed back to reveal warm hazel eyes. There was a quiet confidence in his stance, the kind that didn't come from money but from effort. "Michael Hayes," he introduced himself, setting the bag on her desk. "I run deliveries for Carolina Eats. And apparently, I'm also a reminder that skipping meals is bad for business." Caroline laughed softly. "You sound more like my mother than my assistant." She must have been wise. Then, something in the way he said it, without charm, just sincerity, caught her off guard. They spoke for a few minutes about the food, the long lines, and the unseasonably hot weather. When he left, she found herself smiling, not quite sure why. Over the next few weeks, his deliveries became more frequent. Sometimes it was coincidence. Other times, she suspected her assistant was secretly matchmaking. One afternoon, when she forgot her umbrella, Michael appeared outside the building with one. "You're the only person in Charlotte who'd walk into a thunderstorm for a staff meeting," he teased. It started with small talk about movies, road trips, and the best barbecue joints in town. Then came longer conversations, like the evening they walked along the Catawba River. The sun dipped low behind the trees, coloring the water in shades of amber. Michael told her about his childhood, foster homes, part-time jobs, the years spent trying to find stability. "Sometimes I think people like me were born just to watch others win," he said quietly. Caroline shook her head. "That's not true. My parents started with nothing. If they were here, they'd say what matters isn't where you start. It's what you keep sacred when life tests you." He looked at her then, truly looked, as if trying to believe her. You really think love can grow between two people from completely different worlds? Caroline smiled, eyes reflecting the sunset on the river. Maybe those are the only kinds of love that ever change anything. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of magnolias from the far shore. Somewhere between laughter and silence, something delicate and real began to take root. Quiet as the current, steady as faith. The night air in Charlotte was thick with summer heat, heavy enough to cling to the skin. The streetlights along Ashbrook Avenue flickered against the dark pavement, cutting pools of light into the shadows. Michael Hayes was almost done with his final delivery, a takeout order for a late-night office downtown before heading home. He checked his watch, slipped the phone into his pocket, and turned toward the narrow side street where he'd parked his bike. He never saw them coming. A sharp sound, footsteps quick and purposeful, and then the impact. Someone shoved him hard from behind. The world tilted. His knee hit the curb with a crack. Pain exploded through his leg. Two men loomed over him, faces half hidden beneath hoodies. One demanded, "Where's the key? Say it." The other kicked him in the ribs when he didn't respond. Michael gasped, trying to crawl backward. I don't know what you're talking about." The first man grabbed his jacket, voice low and furious. "Don't play dumb. You know the numbers." Before Michael could reply, a passing car turned onto the street. Headlights swept across the pavement. The attackers froze for half a second, then bolted into the dark, leaving him bleeding on the curb. He tried to stand, but his leg gave out beneath him. The pain was blinding now. He pressed a trembling hand to his thigh and fumbled for his phone. The screen was cracked, but somehow the digits still glowed. He dialed 911. The operator's calm voice guided him through the haze. "Stay on the line, sir. Help is on the way." He barely remembered the sirens. The flashing red and blue lights blurred together. Paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher. Voices fading in and out. Compound fracture, low blood pressure, before darkness swallowed everything. When he woke again, it was to the sterile hum of a hospital room. The ceiling lights burned white through his eyelids. A nurse murmured something about surgery. Somewhere in the fog of morphine, a familiar voice reached him, Caroline's. "Michael, it's me. You're safe. I'm right here." Her hand squeezed his, anchoring him to reality. But he didn't respond, not fully. His lips moved, whispering words that made no sense. "Magnolia for 1-8. Caroline leaned closer, brow furrowed. "Michael? What is that?" He repeated it again, softer, slower. "Magnolia for 1-8, and then drifted back into unconsciousness. The heart monitor steadied into a slow rhythm. Caroline sat beside him all night, the glow of the machines casting her face in pale light. She wrote the numbers on the back of a receipt, circling the word Magnolia. Outside the window, dawn was breaking, soft, pink, and utterly indifferent. She had no idea what the numbers meant, only that they sounded like a secret he had carried long before she met him. And for the first time since they'd fallen in love, Caroline felt a shiver of fear that there were parts of Michael's life she might never fully understand. The next week, Caroline sat quietly beside Michael in the softly lit office of Dr. Raymond Lee. The walls were lined with shelves of psychology books, and a small fountain trickled somewhere near the corner, its sound steady and calming. Outside, the hum of Charlotte's afternoon traffic faded to nothing as the door closed behind them. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I still think this is a little weird," he muttered. Dr. Lee smiled, his voice low and even. "It's not magic, Mr. Hayes. Just memory work. Sometimes our mind buries what hurts too much to face directly. You said you keep hearing the word Magnolia and a series of numbers, right?" Michael nodded, fingers intertwined tightly. "Yeah, 418. Over and over. I don't even know why. Let's see if your subconscious does." The therapist adjusted the chair into a reclined position and dimmed the lights. Just close your eyes, focus on my voice, and let your thoughts drift wherever they need to go. You'll remember, not as a dream, but as a moment that's been waiting for you. Caroline sat across from them, heart pounding. She didn't know what she expected. Tears, silence. Maybe nothing at all. But as Michael's breathing slowed, something in the room changed. The tension left his shoulders. His voice came quieter, younger. I see a house small, with green shutters, he whispered. There's a garden, roses, and a man standing by the gate. Dr. Lee spoke gently. Can you tell us who he is? Michael's brow furrowed. He's tall, dark hair, wearing a gray coat. There's a silver watch on his wrist. He's smiling at me. A pause. He says, if anything happens, remember this. Magnolia, 418. The words came haltingly, as if pulled from deep water. Caroline leaned forward, breath caught. Does he tell you why? The doctor asked. Michael shook his head. No. He kneels down and hugs me. His coat smells like motor oil and peppermint. Then, someone's shouting inside the house. A woman crying. He turns and runs to the car. What do you do? I run after him. His voice trembled now, a child's fear bleeding through the man's body. But I trip. There's dirt on my hands, and then she catches me. Who catches you? A woman. She's not my mom. His eyes fluttered under closed lids. Short hair, red sweater. She says, it's okay, honey. You're safe now. But I wasn't. I knew he wasn't coming back. The room fell still except for the quiet hum of the fountain. Dr. Lee let him rest a few seconds before gently counting backward. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Michael opened his eyes slowly, tears glistening beneath the fluorescent light. Caroline reached for his hand. He stared at her, dazed. It wasn't a dream. I think that man was my father. And for the first time, the numbers that haunted him no longer felt random. They felt like a doorway to a life he'd forgotten. The old Turner house stood at the edge of East Charlotte, its porch sagging under years of Carolina rain. Michael had driven there a dozen times before, but never with this kind of weight pressing on his chest. Caroline parked on the curb, watching him quietly. She knew this wasn't just another visit. It was the confrontation he had avoided his whole life. Inside, the familiar scent of lemon polish and fried cornbread clung to the air. Helen Turner was folding laundry at the kitchen table, her silver hair tied back neatly. George sat by the window, reading the newspaper, his glasses sliding down his nose. When Michael stepped in, both of them froze. Michael, Helen said softly, voice tinged with both surprise and guilt. You didn't say you were coming. I needed to talk. His voice was tight, almost brittle. He glanced between them. The people who had raised him, fed him, loved him, but who suddenly felt like strangers. I saw someone, a therapist. He helped me remember things. George folded his paper slowly. What kind of things? A man, tall, dark hair. He told me to remember something. Magnolia, 418. He said he'd come back for me, but he never did. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Helen's hands trembled as she placed the folded towel on the table. Michael! He took a step closer. Who was he? Helen looked toward her husband, eyes pleading for help, but George didn't speak. After a long moment, she whispered, Arthur Hayes. The name hit him like a physical blow. So he's real. George sighed, removing his glasses. Arthur was our neighbor. We all worked at the same auto plant before it closed down. When the company went under in '98, he got tangled in some bad business. People were after him, investors, maybe worse. One night he came knocking. He had you in his arms, maybe 3 years old. Said he just needed us to watch you for a few days. And you agreed? Michael asked, his voice cracking. George nodded. He was desperate. We didn't know the full story. He said he'd come back once things calmed down. But a week later, your picture was on the news, missing child. Possible connection to financial fraud. We were terrified. Then you fell off your bike, hit your head, and forgot everything. Helen's eyes filled with tears. The doctors said you were lucky to be alive. You didn't remember him, your name, nothing. We thought maybe it was fate's way of giving you a new start. We wanted to protect you. Michael turned away, hands on his head, pacing. You should have told me. You had no right to decide that for me. Helen stood, her voice shaking. We were afraid, sweetheart. We didn't want you to live under the shadow of a man everyone thought was a criminal. For a long time, Michael said nothing. His anger burned, then faltered. He looked at the couple before him, two aging souls who had sacrificed everything for a boy that wasn't even theirs. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. You didn't have to be my parents to love me, but you did anyway. Helen covered her face, sobbing quietly. George reached for his son's shoulder, his hand rough and trembling. And just like that, the anger gave way to something far heavier, but far kinder. The office of Harold Briggs smelled faintly of old coffee and dust. Files were stacked in leaning towers along the walls, and a fan hummed lazily from the corner, doing little to fight the Carolina humidity. The blinds were half closed, letting in slanted rays of light that caught the smoke rising from the detective's coffee mug. Caroline sat across from him, hands folded neatly in her lap. Michael paced behind her, unable to sit still. He had been like this for days, restless, impatient, torn between wanting answers and fearing what those answers might cost. Briggs leaned back in his chair, eyeing them both with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. You're telling me you've got a name, Arthur Hayes, and a few numbers tied to something called Magnolia. That's it. Michael nodded. That's all I've got. But it's real. He's my father. The detective scribbled a note on his pad. All right. Magnolia could be a street, a company, even a bank. I'll start there. If your father was involved in anything back in the late 90s, there should be records. People don't just disappear, not completely. Caroline handed him an envelope. We'll cover whatever it takes. Please just find him. Briggs gave a slow nod, then glanced toward Michael. If he's out there, son, we'll find him. Just be ready for what you might hear. Truth's not always as kind as we want it to be. Those words lingered long after they left his office. For the next month, time moved strangely, fast when they worked, slow when they waited. Every phone call made Michael jump. Every unknown number brought a surge of hope, followed by disappointment. Caroline watched him unravel, quietly, trying to anchor him with small moments, coffee on the porch, late-night drives around Lake Norman, quiet reassurances that he wasn't alone anymore. Then, one afternoon, the call came. Briggs's voice was low but steady through the speaker. We found him. Michael's grip on the phone tightened. He's alive. Yes. Arthur Hayes, age 58. He's been living under his own name, believe it or not. No record of arrest. Just vanished from his old life. I tracked him through a charity hospice near Concord. A pause, then a softer tone. He's sick, son. Real sick. Doctors say it's late stage. Caroline reached for Michael's hand. Where exactly? I'll text you the address, Briggs said. If you want to see him, I'd go soon. When the line went dead, Michael just stood there, silent. The hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock filled the room like background noise to a life suddenly redefined. After a long moment, Caroline whispered, You found him, Michael. That's what matters. He nodded slowly, though his eyes were far away. Yeah, he murmured. But I don't know if I'm ready for what comes next. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. as if the world itself was holding its breath for what they were about to uncover. The hospice sat at the far edge of Concord, tucked behind a line of overgrown pines and an abandoned gas station. The building was small, its brick walls faded and cracked, the windows clouded from years of neglect. A paper sign taped to the entrance door read, "Please ring, staff on rounds." Caroline pressed the buzzer while Michael stood motionless beside her, staring at the chipped paint as if it might tell him something he wasn't ready to hear. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and something faintly metallic. The hallways were narrow, dimly lit, lined with faded photographs of sunsets and flowers that tried too hard to look hopeful. A nurse greeted them, tired eyes, kind smile, and led them down the corridor. "He's in room 12, she said softly. "Arthur Hayes. Been here almost a year. Doesn't talk much. But lately, he keeps asking for someone named Michael." The words landed like a tremor. Michael's throat tightened. Caroline slipped her hand into his, her thumb tracing small circles over his skin. When they reached the room, the door was half open. A man lay propped against a thin pillow, his frame barely filling the bed. His hair, once dark, had turned almost white. The light from the window cast fragile lines across his face, lines carved by time, guilt, and exhaustion. Michael froze. It was him, the man from the memory. The silver watch still clung to his wrist, tarnished but unmistakable. Arthur's eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. For a second, confusion flickered there, then disbelief. "Michael." His voice cracked, as if the word itself had rusted inside him. Michael couldn't speak. The years between them felt like a canyon. When he finally found his voice, it came out rough. "Why?" Arthur blinked, tears filling his eyes. "Why what, son? Why did you leave me?" The words erupted, sharp and raw. "You told me to remember. You said you'd come back. I waited, and you never did." Arthur turned his face toward the wall, his shoulders trembling. "I was arrested 2 days after that night. Fraud. False accounting. The company collapse. I didn't steal, Michael. But I signed papers I shouldn't have. When I got out, there was nothing left. Not the house, not your mother, not you. I searched for months, but they said the Turners had moved. And when I finally found where you'd been, he stopped, choking on his own words. I thought you were better off without me." Michael's jaw tightened, his chest rising and falling too fast. "Better off thinking I was unwanted?" Arthur's hands trembled as he reached out. "No, I wanted to spare you from my shame. You were my only good thing, and I ruined even that." Caroline watched in silence, her own eyes glistening. The room felt unbearably small, filled with everything unsaid for decades. Finally, Michael took a step closer. He didn't touch his father's hand, not yet, but he didn't turn away either. Arthur whispered through tears, "You remembered the numbers." Michael nodded faintly. "Magnolia 418. Arthur smiled weakly. "That means I didn't lose everything." Outside, rain began to fall against the window, soft, persistent, like the sound of forgiveness trying to find its way in. The heavy hospice doors closed behind them with a dull thud, sealing in the smell of antiseptic and fading life. The sun had already dipped below the trees, leaving only the afterglow of a dying day. Michael strode across the cracked parking lot, his footsteps echoing against the concrete. His jaw was tight, his breath ragged. Caroline followed a few paces behind, unsure whether to speak or let him walk it out. He stopped by his car, gripping the door so hard his knuckles turned white. "He just let me go," he said finally, his voice trembling with rage. "He thought disappearing was easier than being my father. How do you forgive that?" Caroline stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "He's dying, Michael. What's left to punish?" He turned on her, eyes shining with tears he refused to let fall. "You don't understand. I was that kid who waited by the window for years. Every time a car slowed down on our street, I thought, maybe it's him. Maybe he's finally coming back. But he never did." Caroline took a slow breath. "You're right. I can't understand what that felt like. But I do know what regret looks like. I saw it in his eyes when he said your name. He's been living with it longer than you've been angry." Michael looked away, his shoulders trembling. The sound of cicadas filled the silence, their rhythmic cries pulsing in the humid air. Caroline reached for his hand. "You don't have to forget, Michael. Just don't carry it alone anymore. He's your father. Maybe what he needs right now is what you needed back then, a second chance." For a long moment he didn't move. Then his grip on the car loosened, and he exhaled, long and broken. "I don't even know how to start." "Start small," she whispered. "Start with showing up." Minutes later, they walked back into the hospice. The fluorescent lights flickered softly, and the hallway smelled faintly of rain drifting in from a cracked window. When they reached room 12, Arthur was awake, staring blankly at the ceiling. His eyes widened in disbelief when he saw Michael return. "I shouldn't have walked out," Michael said quietly, his voice stripped of anger. "You made mistakes. So did I. But I'm not here to talk about the past anymore." Arthur blinked, uncertain. "Then why are you here?" Michael stepped closer, resting a hand on the metal rail of the bed. "Because no one should die alone. You're my father, whether I like it or not. And I'm not running this time." Arthur's lips trembled as tears escaped the corners of his eyes. "I don't deserve you." Michael shook his head. "Maybe not, but I need you to fight. You owe me that much." Arthur reached for his son's hand, and this time, Michael didn't pull away. They stayed like that, two lives stitched together again by something stronger than apology. Outside, the rain had stopped. The magnolia trees swayed in the breeze, their petals glistening like they, too, had finally been washed clean. 2 weeks later, Arthur Hayes was moved from the hospice to a private medical center in downtown Charlotte. The doctors were surprised by the sudden change in his chart. Someone had paid off his bills, transferred him to a private suite, and arranged for one of the best surgeons in the state. When Arthur woke from anesthesia, the first thing he saw was Caroline sitting beside him, reading quietly from a file. Michael stood by the window, arms crossed, pretending to study the view, but really just trying to steady his breath. "You didn't have to do all this," Arthur murmured weakly. Caroline closed the folder and smiled. "You're family now. We take care of our own." Arthur's lips quivered. "After everything I've done, you still believe that?" Michael stepped closer. "I didn't come here to keep score. I came because I meant what I said. You owe me a fight, and this is where it starts." Recovery was slow but steady. Caroline visited every morning before work, bringing coffee and the newspaper. Michael stayed late, helping his father walk down the hallway, step by careful step. Each night, Arthur would tell stories about the years before it all fell apart, about his love for engineering and the small business he built from scratch before bad partnerships dragged him under. One evening, while they sat together in the quiet hospital room, Arthur grew thoughtful. "There's something I never told anyone," he said. "Before I was arrested, I hid what was left of my money, not because it was illegal, but because I didn't trust the people around me. Partners, lawyers, they all wanted a piece." Michael frowned. "You mean there's still something left?" Arthur nodded slowly. "A safe deposit box at Magnolia Trust Bank. Box number 418. Caroline and Michael exchanged a look, the same numbers that had haunted his dreams. The next morning, they drove together to the bank in uptown Charlotte. The marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent light, and a young manager escorted them to the vault after verifying Arthur's identity. The sound of the lock turning echoed in the narrow room. Inside the box were documents, a sealed envelope, and a stack of certificates, bonds, stocks, and deeds, all still valid. Arthur exhaled shakily. 25 years, he whispered. I thought I'd lost it all. Michael's eyes met Caroline's. Maybe you didn't lose it. Maybe it was just waiting for you to be ready. In the weeks that followed, Arthur used part of the recovered funds to help Caroline stabilize the Whitmore Automotive Group. He offered advice on restructuring, hiring, and community outreach, drawing from the same principles that once made his own business thrive. Under their joint efforts, the company not only recovered but began to grow again. One evening, Caroline invited them both to dinner at her family's lake house. The sunset poured gold across the water as Arthur raised his glass. For second chances, he said quietly. Michael smiled, and for not wasting them this time. As the sky turned crimson above Lake Norman, laughter echoed through the open windows. The ghosts of the past had finally loosened their grip, making room for something new, something built not for money, but from forgiveness, faith, and the courage to begin again. Charlotte's nightlife pulsed with restless energy that Friday night, the thud of bass from every street corner, neon signs flickering over crowds of strangers pretending to be happy. But inside the dim interior of the lantern room, the music seemed distant, swallowed by the tension that followed Arthur Hayes and his son as they stepped through the door. Arthur leaned on his cane, eyes scanning the room. He's here, he murmured, his tone low and steady. Tyler Nash, Deborah's boy. Michael nodded toward the far end of the bar, where a man in a designer jacket sat slouched over a half-empty glass, laughing too loudly at nothing. Tyler's blonde hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, his tie loosened, his arrogance dulled only by the alcohol dripping through his veins. Arthur's jaw tightened. That's him. They approached quietly, the low hum of conversation masking their steps. Tyler didn't notice them until their shadows fell across his table. He blinked, squinting up at the older man. Arthur Hayes, he said with a crooked grin. Didn't expect you to crawl out of your grave. Arthur's voice remained calm. I came to ask one question. Why did you send those men after my son? Tyler's smirk faltered for half a heartbeat, then returned, uglier this time. Your son? You mean that delivery boy? Please, you think anyone cares about some nobody from East Charlotte? He took another drink, eyes glinting with something dark. You had it all once, didn't you? The company, the house, the money. My mother used to say you deserved to lose it. And when I found out you still had something hidden away, he laughed, low and bitter. Let's just say I wanted to finish what she started. Michael's hands clenched at his sides. You hired those men to hurt me for money? Tyler shrugged, his words starting to slur. Not hurt, just scare you, make you tell us where it was. But you were too stupid to know. Guess I should have picked a better target. Arthur's cane struck the floor with a sharp crack. The sound made Tyler flinch. You nearly killed him, Arthur said, his voice trembling, not from weakness, but fury contained by sheer will. He is your blood, Tyler, whether you want to admit it or not. You and he share a name that I once believed meant something. Tyler sneered. Don't act like you're some saint. You left us first. For a moment, Arthur's expression broke, pain flickering behind the stern composure. But then he straightened, his voice clear and cold. Maybe I did, but I'm not leaving my son again, and I won't let him become what you've chosen to be. Michael stepped forward, grabbing his father's arm. Let's go. He's not worth it. Arthur hesitated, then nodded. They turned toward the exit as Tyler slumped back into his chair, muttering curses drowned out by the music. Outside, the air was cool and quiet. Arthur exhaled, the anger finally draining from his body. You were right, he said softly. Justice doesn't always mean revenge. Michael looked up at him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. No. Sometimes it's just walking away while the other man stays stuck in the dark. Behind them, the club's neon lights flickered and buzzed, just like Tyler's world. Loud, fleeting, and already burning out. A year later, spring had returned to Lake Norman. The magnolia trees along the shoreline were in full bloom, their ivory petals scattered like snowflakes across the wooden deck of the Whitmore Villa. The air smelled of rain, sunlight, and new beginnings. Inside the house, laughter floated from the kitchen. Caroline moved slowly now, her hand resting on the curve of her belly, a soft glow in her face that had nothing to do with the morning light. Michael stood behind her, helping her slice fruit for breakfast, while Arthur sat at the table, surrounded by open newspapers and the sound of birds outside. He looked healthier now, thinner than before, but alive, the quiet strength in his eyes restored. "This one's going to have your stubbornness," Arthur teased, nodding toward Caroline's stomach. Michael grinned. "Then we're doomed." Caroline rolled her eyes and laughed, the sound warm and gentle. For a moment, life felt simple again, unburdened by the shadows that had once haunted them. That peace lasted until the doorbell rang. When Caroline opened the door, a woman stood on the porch, her hair gray, her makeup smeared from tears. Deborah Nash. Caroline froze. Michael stepped forward instinctively, but Deborah's voice broke first. "I wouldn't come here if I had anywhere else to go." She held out a trembling hand with a crumpled hospital bill. "It's Tyler. He had a car accident last month. The doctors say he'll never walk again. I sold everything, but it's not enough. Please, Arthur. I know I don't deserve to ask, but he's your son, too." Arthur's expression turned to stone. For a long time he said nothing. Then he stood slowly, leaning on his cane. "When I was sick, you didn't visit. You told people I was already dead. You taught that boy to hate me before he could even spell my name. And now you want me to fix what you broke." Deborah bowed her head, silent except for her quiet sobs. Caroline stepped forward. "Arthur," she said softly, "let me handle this." He looked at her, his voice rough. "You don't owe her anything." "I know," Caroline replied, "but that's not the point." That evening, while the house was quiet, Caroline made a call to the hospital in Charlotte under a private account. She never mentioned it again, and Arthur never asked, but weeks later, a letter came addressed to an anonymous benefactor, thanking them for covering Tyler's therapy. Caroline tucked it away in a drawer and never spoke of it. Months passed. The magnolias bloomed again, filling the air with their sweet, heavy fragrance. On a mild afternoon, Arthur sat outside beneath one of the trees, holding a newborn wrapped in a soft blanket. "Her name's Grace," Caroline said, watching the two of them. Arthur smiled faintly. "Then she's already the best of us." The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. The petals drifted down around them like blessings. And for the first time in years, there was no bitterness left, only quiet forgiveness carried on the wind. Justice didn't arrive with noise or anger. It bloomed quietly like the magnolias outside their window,